Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three martinis coming up.
Very glad you are with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is back. He is brimming full of ideas, some of which he probably brought to the summit and others which he picked up there. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the podcast today. We'll also have a champagne toast at a tragically young age. Mia Love, the former congresswoman from Utah. We'll talk about that towards the end of the podcast. We'll also expand a little bit on what John Gabriel and I were talking about how the youth vote, and particularly young men, not turning out how the Democrats wanted. And that's a big, big, big opportunity for Republicans moving forward. But we start with the first of our three good martinis, and that is something that happened in the Oval Office where President Trump, with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, announcing the full green light on the F-47. And no, that number is not an accident. I'm sure it's related to the fact that Trump is the 47th president. But when you find out what this fighter plane can do, it's really cool.
The F-47 will be the most advanced, most capable, most lethal aircraft ever built. An experimental version of the plane has secretly been flying for almost 5 years, and we're confident that it massively overpowers the capabilities of any other nation. There's no other nation. We know every other plane. I've seen every one of them, and it's not even close. This is a next level. You know, level 5 is good. This is level 6, they say. The F-47 is equipped with state-of-the-art stealth technology. It's virtually unseeable and unprecedented power. It's got the most power of any jet of its kind ever made. Maneuverability, likewise, is there's never been anything like it, despite the power and speed. Its speed is top. It's over 2, which is something that you don't hear very often.
I assume when he means over 2, he means Mach 2. And Trump, Jim, he's very fond of saying anything that's related to one of his policies. No one's ever seen anything like it. In this case, it appears to be true. So that's exciting. It seems to be outpacing, if he's to be believed anything, our adversaries around the world, particularly the Chinese or the Russians or anybody else is coming up with right now. So the fact that we're once again drilling down, focused on warfighting. That's the job of the Defense Department. That's the job of the commander-in-chief. And looks like, at least in terms of this issue, that's exactly what they're doing.
Greg, this is one of those rare times where we can cite as documentary evidence and as useful background for the debate behind this decision, the cinematic classic Top Gun Maverick. In which people are, Maverick, as older Tom Cruise, people are telling him that the age of the manned aircraft is over and that everything is switching over to drones. That's in the movie, but that's very much the reality in the U.S. military and around the world right now. We've seen firsthand in Ukraine how drones are transforming the nature of warfare. And so no less a figure than Elon Musk had been making the case. We shouldn't be building F-35s. We shouldn't be building manned aircraft at all. We should be heading over to an all-drone U.S. military aircraft arsenal. And I will try not to bring up the reference in Terminator 2 to when Skynet is put in charge of all unmanned drones for U.S. air defense and things like that. But I turn on this one to my colleague, Mark Wright, who is in the military, who says, look, he understands the arguments on both sides. He's not 100% convinced. But I think the model of keeping American pilots in the air with the best tools available is the one that is more likely to succeed compared to going to an all-drone Air Force. Even if unmanned aircraft eventually do become the future of war, as of right now, manned aircraft are the more proven model. I had half expected that Trump and Hegseth, under the influence of Elon Musk, would cancel the program. Musk has been vocal about his views of the obsolescence of big, expensive legacy platforms, such as the Navy's aircraft carriers and the Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps variants of the F-35. Was Elon convinced otherwise, or did Trump and Hegseth hear him out and decide to go in another direction? In either scenario, this actually speaks well of them. If evidence came to Elon that convinced him, this is, we need to keep manned aircraft around for at least another generation. Good for him. If he didn't change his mind and Hegseth or someone else in the Defense Department convinced him, no, actually we do need. Well, this does indicate that Trump is not Elon's puppet, and all of the, snickering on the left that, Elon is the real president and things like that. Look, I think it's very clear that Elon is a very trusted advisor to President Trump, but he's, in the end, the buck stops with the president, and Trump made this one. And as far as I can tell, this is the right decision, or at least this is not an obviously wrong decision. We're probably going to have some delays. We're probably going to have some complications when you're trying to develop the single most advanced. But as Trump mentioned, they've got prototypes. So we've got a sense of how to build this thing. Now we just have to mass produce it. So again, also your point that this is what the Pentagon is there for. It's it's designed to do this. By the way, I think calling it the F-47 when Trump is the 47th president is probably not a coincidence, and probably helped in the sales of this. But in the end, I think this is ironically, to quote Top Gun Maverick, the day may come when the era of manned aircraft in combat is over. But today is not that day, and tomorrow's not looking that good either, to paraphrase the movie.
Yeah. Part of the point of our military is to project power in certain parts of the world. And to do that, you need to have a physical presence. And that's one of the reasons I think you're seeing shipbuilding as a priority as well. It's going to be a while before we can get those things afloat and on the water. But yes, you're right. That evolution is probably already happening. Perhaps it needs to happen at some point, but I don't think you just throw everything out that has worked well for generations. And so getting back to the things that the Pentagon was created to do is definitely a good martini. Well, I also want to tell you today that the 3 Martini Lunch, our podcast, is sponsored by BetterHelp. And is your year off to a good start? I hope it's off to a good start. But if it's not, you're already just about 3 months in and you're thinking, man, nothing is changing and it needs to change. Well, maybe it's time to talk to someone about it, an expert who can really, really help. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. In addition to the fact that they've got licensed and trained therapists, they can save you a lot of money. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, which adds up very quickly. But with BetterHelp Online Therapy, you can save on average up to 50% per session.
With more than 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform and has served more than 5 million people all around the world. And it's convenient. You can join a session with the click of a button and helping you fit therapy into your busy life. And you can switch therapists at any time.
And if you go on that site, you can see they have a lot of therapists to choose from. So it's totally up to you. And if after all that searching, you find out after a conversation that maybe that's not the right one, you certainly have the freedom to pick another therapist who could potentially help you. But your well-being is worth it. Visit BetterHelp.com/3ML to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, as mentioned, Jim was at the National Review Ideas Summit in National Harbor, Maryland, Thursday and Friday. That's why he wasn't on the podcast. He had the honor of interviewing Ron and Casey DeSantis, as well as Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. There is electoral speculation about Governor Kemp. Will he or will he not challenge Senator Ossoff in Georgia in 2026? Premature polling suggests that he's by far the best option for Republicans in that race. And, of course, there's been a lot of speculation about whether Casey DeSantis will run for governor of Florida in 2026 because Ron DeSantis is term limited. And so one of the other moments I just want to highlight real quick because it just speaks of the optimism and the specialness of America, which is one of the other ideas that we can't let slip away. And that's Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares, who's up for re-election this year. And that will be no easy fight. But he talks about how we get so used to our own system that we think it's either normal or we only focus on the things that we think are flawed about it. But he spent time talking about just how special our system is.
I had the honor of speaking to UVA Law School earlier this week, and I told those students, you think the way you live your life is normal. It is abnormal. It is utterly, completely abnormal if you look at the totality of human history. The vast, vast majority of people that have ever lived on this planet did not have freedom of speech or freedom of religion or the ability to cast a ballot for who their leaders are. We take that as just for granted as Americans. That is as normal as just breathing air. It's actually abnormal. It is rare. It is unique. It is precious. I call it the American miracle of what we have here. And we oftentimes take it for granted. And I tell my daughters all the time, gratitude is the most underrated of all human traits. And ingratitude is probably the ugliest, but gratitude is the most underrated. My feeling, going back to when we talk to young people today, is giving them that sense of gratitude.
And this might feed into our third martini because a lot of young people are just constantly fed the narrative about America's original sins, and slavery, and the things that we've gotten wrong or had to work on to fix over time. But the founding of this country is an absolute miracle. And thankfully, we're going to be celebrating that a lot over the next year and change with the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. But so, Jim, loving America at the National Review Summit. So you got to love that. And then also you're able to kind of dig in, hoping to get some answers about future plans from some folks with some potentially strong futures here on the right.
Sure. My first thought about Jason Miyares is because of Virginia's kind of odd off-year schedule. You have a presidential election, and then we have statewide elections for governor, lieutenant governor, and a state attorney general. And once, also we have this unusual situation in which only one term is just when we were allowed to be a governor. You can go back away for 4 years and come back 4 years later to run again. But usually a Republican governor finishes his term. And then there's the question of, okay, so who's going to follow? Will it be the lieutenant governor or will it be the state attorney general? And if you don't, this has been an issue amongst the Virginia Republican Party for quite some time. The sense of who's going to succeed who. Miyares had the opportunity to choose to run for governor, has chosen to run for another term as state attorney general. I think, not just from those remarks, you just look at his whole record, he's really well suited for that. Winsome Sears is going to run for governor. We wish her well, every bit of luck, and she may well need it. The longstanding pattern in Virginia politics is that if your party wins the White House, you're probably going to lose the governor's mansion the next time around. So we'll see what happens. We'll be pulling for Winsome Sears. She deserves to win. But if she doesn't, whether Miyares wins re-election as state attorney general or not, he'll be well seated to run 5 years from now. And we could see something useful happening there. Anyway, he's a great guy. Thanks to him for coming. On my 2 interviews, Brian Kemp did not want to reveal whether he was going to run for Senate. And he wasn't. It's not like I annoyed him. But I did I said, I want to ask this question. They said, fine. He asked, he gave it. Well, I'm very busy with the state legislature right now. We've got a major tort reform bill going on. So I'll give it some thought. I'll pray on it. I'll let you know. And I was like, well, you are term limited, right? It's not like you got other stuff to do. And the answer is like, well, I'm busy. So we'll see what happens there. Last interview I did, Casey DeSantis, the first lady of Florida, I think it's safe to say that the DeSantises are at minimum interested in her running for governor. Trump has already endorsed Florida Congressman Byron Donalds. There was originally a while ago some talk that Matt Gaetz was going to run. I think, Casey DeSantis gave a very long answer. Nothing wrong with it. It was a very detailed answer, talking about how proud she was of her husband's record, how much had been accomplished, but also warning that it could be undone or reversed or squandered by the wrong successor. And then she ended with, well, we'll see, right? Which, Greg, if you're not interested in running for governor, you know what you say? I'm not interested in running for governor. Then Ron DeSantis told the story of how the late Rush Limbaugh said that Casey should be the one running for governor and not him. I don't think you put that out there if you're not at least curious about it, if you're not at least putting out a trial balloon. And the other thing I will point out, you have somebody for an event like this, you give them a sense of the topics that you're going to talk about. And we checked, is it okay to ask about, running for governor? Not only were they, had no problem with it, I think the DeSantises wanted that question asked. So this is not a matter of, there's buzz out there and it's coming out from DeSantis supporters or something. No, I think it's safe to say they are at least thinking about it. And you look at a Trump endorsement in Florida means a lot. No getting around that. But you look at the DeSantis fundraising for the last 2 years. You look at the name ID. And for people who are like, God, I don't like these dynasties. I don't like the idea of a wife running for the position her husband held and he's term limited. Watch the interview or watch any interview she does. Casey DeSantis knows her stuff. She knows state policy. This is not somebody who's just going to coast on her husband's coattails. Now, she'll have to earn it. She'll have to go out and demonstrate that she can be a candidate. But boy, having spent just a little bit of time, more than a little bit of time with her backstage and on stage, just great retail politics. Just she is going to wow people doing the handshaking in the diners and all that stuff. She's also got a very inspirational story of fighting and winning a fight against cancer. So do not underestimate Casey DeSantis is my takeaway from that. Not 100% certain that she's going to run, but I think it's safe to say you don't go through all these steps. Like the fact that the DeSantis did that joint interview is one further piece of evidence that
yes.
This is not, she didn't have to do that, and he didn't have to do that, and so I think this is a sign that this is something that's at least a strong possibility somewhere down the pike.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think Mrs. Kemp was part of a joint interview, right?
She was not. She was not. Could have been. Would have welcomed her too.
Right. So that suggests that they're at least very seriously thinking about it. But, there's a reason Trump preemptively endorsed Byron Donalds before Donalds even got in the race. I think he's still frustrated somehow with DeSantis for running for president in 2024, and
how dare
he is not letting go of that lightly. And so if she does get in, I suspect Trump will be actively involved in that campaign, which will be tough for her to overcome in Florida, even though if she's anything like her husband politically, you can't ask for a much better governor than he's been down there in Florida.
I think she would be like him, but more conservative. And maybe tougher. I'm not kidding when I say that.
Wow.
Okay. Maybe even feistier, right? So, So don't underestimate her.
All right, Jim, on to our final good martini now. And as we mentioned, John Gabriel and I talked about this a little bit on Friday because the Democrats are underwater with their voters. 40% of Democrats are satisfied with their congressional leadership. 49 are not. And so people were speculating as to whether this will lead to a Democratic version or a left-wing version of the Tea Party, which we kind of joked about. Well, they've once again learned the exact wrong lesson if they're planning to lurch left. And then somehow we got into the discussion of young people and how Democrats thought that young people were just going to be in their corner forever because millennials, and particularly millennial men, have not shifted more conservative. So they just assume that would be the case with the younger people. But because of COVID and because young men have been told they're the problem, as John Gabriel pointed out, they have revolted now against the Democrats. And the latest numbers, and this even came up in a conversation involving Ezra Klein, who is certainly not excited about this because he's on the left. Basically, there's now a 20-point gender gap among young people between men and women, which is wider than it is just about everywhere else in the age groups, going all the way up to senior citizens, which is the narrowest gender gap. And so if the Democrats have lost Gen Z young men, or at least to a large extent have, and the people coming up behind them potentially have the same memories of COVID and so forth, and the shutdowns and the indoctrination that they potentially faced in school. This is going to be a big problem for Democrats, and they don't seem to be coming up with any sort of solution other than bad language, Jim, to try and win them back, which doesn't seem to be working either.
Yeah, look, I don't find it shocking that young males look at the Democratic Party and don't see anything for them and don't see anything appealing to them. And I think, Greg, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I think there are quite a few middle-aged males who don't look at the Democratic Party and don't see that much that's there for them. Except we've actually done some things in our lives. We had, arguably better era. We'll decide whether you think the 90s or 2000s or 2010s were better. But Ex-John was correct that if the Democratic Party looks at you as the problem to be solved, and you can go back to everything from the idea of putting every other young boy on Ritalin because they are fidgety in class because they don't like to sit there, or you go through high school English curriculums and it's all Jane Austen, and there's if your entire education system is geared towards the interest of young women, and guys don't fit into that, well, clearly there's something wrong with them. What it is no, it's not. The problem is not that they're acting like bad boys. The problem is they're acting like boys, and you want them to act like girls. Right? And I've been at this, as the father of two guys, I've had this, front and center in my mind for a long time. Thankfully, we've been pretty good with this, but there's a lot of school districts where that's kind of the prevailing attitude there. And then when you have this entire kind of cultural tie that says to young men, you are the problem, right? You are look, between you, me, and the fence post, yes, young men are full of testosterone. Young men are full of what can be, that can manifest in a whole bunch of different ways. It can manifest in aggressiveness. It can manifest in recklessness. There's a reason kids like to be on skateboards. It's Jordan Peterson who said when kids were doing skateboard tricks, let them do it, because young men feel a need to prove themselves. Young men need a purpose. They need a challenge. They need to do things that are difficult, and this is what gives them actual sense of self-esteem, actual sense of accomplishment, sense of self-worth. I've heard this very interesting argument going around that therapy isn't as effective for men. A lot of different therapists out there, got to find the right one. But the interesting thing is that a lot of guys, it's not enough to just talk about what's bothering you. You need to take action. You need to do something a little bit, there needs to be some step on top of that. And so my attitude, you have this entire cultural tide that has been going against young men from the beginning. Well, of course they're going to say that. And the Democratic Party, which has intertwined itself with feminism, and intertwined itself with this idea of yes, women are right, believe all women, unless they're accusing a prominent Democratic official. This entire mentality is the old men are wrong, women are right, and it ever will be so. And women are perpetually the underdogs. Women are perpetually the ones who need a hand up, even though men are going to college in much fewer numbers, even though men have much higher rates of suicide or much higher rates of successfully acting out upon suicidal urges and things like that. Men are underdogs in a whole bunch of different ways, but the Democratic Party does not want to hear it. And part of it is that the Democratic Party, the more feminine it gets, the more men are repelled by it, the more men don't want to participate in it, which means it gets more feminine, and it turns into this vicious cycle. Anyway, now that we've probably offended everyone, or at least I've offended everyone, and when I talk about therapy, remember, BetterHelp is there for you. But just kind of observing that, like, what do Democrats expect from this? If you're a young male, what's there for you? What are the Democrats offering you that is a better deal? At least the Republicans don't treat you like the enemy. Don't treat you like there's something wrong with you, need to be fixed. And if that's if Democrats were to reevaluate that, it would be a huge step in the right direction. But Greg, I'm not going to hold my breath.
No, not at all. And yeah, both of the guys on this podcast, it's Ezra Klein, who was, as I said, and he was with a guy named David Shore, talking about this and how you'd think the older folks, the more traditional value-based folks, would be the ones perhaps more lopsided for the Republicans. But no, that the 75-year-olds actually voted for Kamala Harris in much higher percentages than young people, especially young men. And this comment in particular jumps out. It says it's a real shift. This is the thing I'm most shocked by in the last 4 years, that young people have gone from being the most progressive generation since the baby boomers, and maybe even in some ways more so, to becoming potentially the most conservative generation that we've experienced in maybe 50 to 60 years. So, Gen Z, if you want to challenge Gen X for the most conservative generation, go for it. You've got bigger numbers. We'll gladly have you on our side, and come on over. But the biggest conservative generation, in potentially half a century or more, that's a big, big own goal by the Democrats, who basically drove these people away, probably more so than Republicans winning them over. But your mileage may vary.
We'll take it.
Finally, Jim, and we're certainly sad to be doing this yet again, but another significant political figure has passed away. We knew this one was coming. Mia Love has passed away at the age of just 49 due to brain cancer. For those who have paid attention to national politics for quite a while, Mia Love kind of burst onto the national scene in 2012 when she was running for a House seat in Utah. She'd been a very successful mayor of Saratoga Springs, Utah. She lost by less than 1,000 votes that year, but ran again in 2014, won easily that year, won re-election pretty comfortably in 2016. And then in 2018, which was not a good midterm year for Republicans, she lost again by less than 1,000 votes. So a couple of agonizing losses that made her congressional career shorter than we would have hoped for. But to pass away at 49 is just horrible. But she had the wherewithal and the wisdom to write a couple of weeks ago an opinion column at Deseret, I hope I'm saying that right, Deseret.com, about the America she knows, her living wish for the America I know. And she talked about watching her parents, who were Haitian immigrants, come with just $10 in their pocket and work for everything that they had. And then she kind of talks about the lessons she learned from their example and her own life. And she says, what makes America great is the idea that when government is limited and decisions are made closest to the people they impact, people are free. Free to work, free to live, free to choose, free to fail, and free to achieve. The America I know provides everyone an equal opportunity to be as unequaled as they choose to be. The America I know also gives back. Americans, regardless of financial status, are the most giving people on the planet. On their own, without government requirement, our people give their money, their time, and their attention to causes, communities, and people in need, whether it is across the street or around the world. She says the America I know is grounded in gritty determination found in patriots, pioneers, and struggling parents, and small business owners with big ideas, in the farmers who work in the beauty of our landscapes and the artists who paint them, our heroic military, our inspiring Olympic athletes, and in every child who looks at the seemingly impossible and says, I can do that. And then she closes this letter that just came out on March 11th. My living wish and fervent prayer for you and for this nation is that the America I have known is the America you fight to preserve, and that each citizen and every leader will do their part to ensure that the America we know will be the America our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will inherit. So, Jim, that's beautifully written and tells a lot about the American story that so many people have made for themselves and their families. Good for her for articulating, kind of going back at the Ideas Summit, what we cherish about this country. And we cherish the fact that it produced somebody like Mia Love.
Yeah, at the end of the year on this podcast, we do end of the year awards. And I suspect, I haven't gone back and checked, there's a good chance Mia Love was either our rising star, or a runner-up for our rising star, probably in 2014, 2015, something like that. Her political career was cut short by a national wave that had very little to do with her actual record. And her political, any thoughts of political comeback were cut short by the cancer diagnosis. When I was on stage with the DeSantises, I wanted to lead into the discussion of Casey DeSantis and her fight against cancer. And I asked everyone in the room, if you've lost someone you care about to cancer, raise your hand. And it wasn't every hand, but almost all the hands went in there. I feel like losing someone you care about to cancer is now like the universal constant in American life. Mia Love deserved more time on this earth. Deserved more time, I think, in political leadership, an opportunity to show what she could do. That wasn't in the cards. And God, 49 is just, so, in my mind, that's young. So, she will be missed. You can argue she made very much the most of the time she had on this earth. And, again, those closing words are words to live by.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to our podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends to do so as well. Thank you for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. You can get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a good Monday. Please join us Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.